Everybody, I'd like to call to order the Independent School District 112 regular school board meeting dated October 22nd, 2018. The first order of business is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With that in front of us, we have an agenda for this evening. Any motions for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Anderson, seconded by Berg. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Excellent. Motion carries, and we have an agenda. First order of business for that is open forum. Tonight we have one individual, Steve Sheldon, coming up. Just to remind you of that as well, there's the way the process works is you have 3 minutes to speak to the board. At that point, we don't comment as part of this, and someone will follow up with you on the end of that. So thank you for coming in today.
Yes, my name is Steve Sheldon. I live in Chanhassen. Oh, okay. My name is Steve Sheldon. I live in Chanhassen. I guess every morning, the bus comes through our neighborhood. It goes right past our houses, and then we have to walk about 100 yards down further in to meet it. There's 4 families that live right next to us. I mean, we're all right there. And for the last 8 years, that bus stop has been located right in front of our houses. Now, this year, it was moved further down. We all submitted change request forms through the process, and they were supposedly reviewed and denied. And I guess what we are, we're kind of unclear of why it was moved. We were told it was from school board had made some policy changes, and it's supposed in the interest of safety. I guess my argument and all of our arguments is that we're the parents. We are far more aware of the neighborhood, the issues, our children, and everything, and we are all in agreement that we would like the bus stop moved back to where it was. And we think that the parents' opinions in this matter should be part of that review process, and we don't feel that they were listened to. That's really, there's a lot of details and stuff, and we don't need to get into that, but that's really our argument. And we'd just like it to be reviewed with the parents' opinions as part of that. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve, for coming in. And like I said, someone will follow up with you. Thanks. With that, we move on to communications from student reps. Lucy.
Yeah, so it was our homecoming this past weekend, before MEA. We had really nice weather for the parade, which was super good, and we were grateful for that, being that last year it was canceled due to rain. And it was a shortened route, but it was still just as fun, and lots of younger kids were there. It was really good for the community. And then we had our dance with an Under the Sea theme, and so that went on without a hitch. There were no problems, and everyone seemed to have had a really good time. After the football game, which we won, everyone came down onto the field, and there were fireworks that were sponsored by a family who have had 3 children go through. And so everyone was just kind of sitting down there together and just bonding. It was really unique. Like, everyone was there from different groups and different friend groups, and so that was really kind of special, and I think spoke to what Chaska's all about and what the students think are just kind of the vibe is there. So that was really cool. And then that same Friday, actually, the band went around to elementary schools and kind of played the Rouser and different songs to get the elementary schoolers kind of excited and that school spirit early on. We're making the transition to winter sports as fall sports are coming to an end. I know dance started today, and basketball has an informational meeting. Football got the number 4 seed and will host number 5 seed Jefferson tomorrow at home at 7. And the theme that the student section has decided on is a elderly out. So everyone will be out there in their clothes that they borrow from their grandparents. We have our cross country for all conference had 5 athletes named all conference, and tennis had one all conference and 2 honorable mentions. Girls tennis had sections that same Friday up at Gustavus. And there's 3 rounds, and we got to the 3rd round with one of our individual teams, which is the farthest we've gotten, I think, in the past 7 years. So it was really good. And then the CAP, so the Chemical Awareness Group, went and talked to Chaska Middle School East, and that was, again, really rewarding. And Mr. Newman, who facilitates that, the gym teacher at East, said that it was really good, and it went over well with the middle schoolers. And then National Honor Society held a blood drive and collected over 30 units of blood, which saves more than 93 people's lives. So that was really special to see put on.
That's great.
And congratulations to Lucy, who was on homecoming court. So.
Yes, that's why I was gone the last Monday.
All good.
We had coronation. But yeah.
How was the feel, everyone coming back after MEA?
I think it's been pretty well. Yeah, it takes a little bit to get back into it, but I think it was a good break. It was well needed, and I think a lot of college visits, so I think it was a really useful break, and everyone's back now.
That's great. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah.
All right. We move on to consent agenda.
Jeff, if I
Yeah.
can, we're going to just take a quick pause. Jackie Johnston would like to introduce a new staff member that we were going to do at a previous meeting, and we got it tonight, and I think it's on Tim's place. There was probably a little note on there that didn't move over. So.
This is when I called Jackie up last board meeting and said, Jackie, you want to come up, right? And I saw this blank look. Oh, me, no. Come on up.
I didn't have Michelle with me last meeting.
All
So
right.
it is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Milstein. She is with us as the new equity coordinator, a brand new position to our district, a full-time person. Her credentials are impeccable. She came as an immigrant from Uruguay to Canada and ended up in Minnesota. So she speaks French, Spanish, and English. She's taught higher education. She graduated from Carleton College. Also went on to get her master's from Stanford and her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. So she's highly skilled, highly trained, and we'll be back up here in a few months talking about her work. So welcome, Michelle.
Welcome, Michelle. Welcome very much. Glad to have you. All right. Now let's move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as written?
So moved. Second.
All right, moved by Logue, seconded by Cullerin. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Great, motion carries. With that, that moves us on to recommended actions. We're going to kick this off with 2018 audit. Dee Dee?
Good evening. As you recall, on the October 8th work session, the audit report was presented by Clifton Larson Allen. The auditors issued a clean or unmodified opinion. There were no compliance issues, no findings. Fund balance, financial trends, and operations of the various funds were all presented at that meeting. Again, I want to extend my gratitude to Pam Jensen and her staff for a job well done. I know she's not here tonight, but they did do a great job working with the auditors. So with that, I ask the board to approve the audit.
Great. And congratulations on the award that you guys got as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So with that, can I get a motion to approve the 2018 audit?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Meyer, seconded by Anderson. Any discussion? I know we've gone over this and looked at it multiple times, so. All right, with that, we'll call it a vote on it. All those in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Great, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second recommended action is definitions and benefit document approvals, professional technical personnel. Jim?
You bet. I'll talk about both of them. These are 2 more groups that I've been working with to bring forward to you. The first one is that professional technical group. That's about 55 employees from a variety of areas. There's technology people, community ed staff in there, finance, HR, special ed, buildings and grounds. So it's quite the group. And with the professional technical group, that total compensation package is 6% over the 2-year period. The package is very similar to what we've done with all of our compensation packages. It's backloaded, so more of the money is on the second year of the contract. With the professional technical group, the compensation package includes, most of it is an increase to wages. They did increase their district contribution to the insurance in year 2 just by $95. And they also, we put some money towards the district match for like the 403B of $125 in year 2. Okay. With the supervisor manager group, it's a smaller group. It's about 18 employees, but again, it's the kind of the coordinators, supervisors, managers from all the different areas, basically the same group that I talked about before. Their total compensation package is at 5.65% over the 2-year period. Again, backloaded. And with their compensation package, everything is actually going to wages. Both of these groups are at-will employees, and I think Clint put something in the packet about that. So I've just kind of updated the language in regard to it's a definitions and benefits document rather than a contract or a master agreement, okay? And again, that was something that was actually mentioned to me a couple of years ago when we had the contracts reviewed by MSBA. They said you can do it kind of one way or the other, and I just kind of waited 2 years and did a lot of the other things the last time around and did this time around. So it wasn't any surprise to the employees. They know that they're at-will employees. It's just, and it's always been called a definitions and benefits document, okay? So with that, administration recommends the board approval of those proposed definitions and benefit documents with the professional technical group and that coordinator, manager, supervisor group.
Is there a motion for the approval of the professional technical personnel along with coordinators, managers, and supervisors?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Logue, seconded by Anderson. Any questions for Jim? Jim, as you stated, these are in line with pretty much every other group that we've been negotiating with and kind of set forth in 2019, correct?
Correct, yes.
And remind us where are we at? Is this our third and fourth, or?
These are third and fourth. I've probably got about 5 to go.
Okay, very good. I thought you had 8, but I guess you have 9. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Very good.
Yep.
And what's your rollout for the final ones? What is the phase for that?
I'm hoping all of them will be to you by the December meeting. Right. Yep. Close in all of them, actually.
What I do appreciate, Jim, is that each employee group is allowed to take that money and do with it what they will. And so that just speaks to the work you do and that negotiation. So thank you I know it's a lot of work, and so I appreciate the work you put into that.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
Great. Well, with that, all those in favor of the motion signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Great. Motion carries.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim. So that ends our recommended actions and moves us into reports. First report is the community survey. Brett?
Good evening, board members, superintendent. I'm pleased to introduce Peter Leatherman of the Morris Leatherman Company. As you know, we periodically check in with our community, and as we are looking to grapple with the issues of housing growth and deferred maintenance in our district, we thought this was a good time to check in and conduct a survey with our public. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Peter to present an overview of the results.
Lovely. It's great to be here with you this evening, back again. This time around, we conducted a sample of 400 randomly selected residents across the district. We talked with them. This is pretty much hot off the presses. Started October 1st, ended October 12th. The average interview time was 18 minutes. We're right now reaching the window where it's difficult to call people because everybody's sick to death of voter IDing and get out the vote effort. So after this Thursday, we're shutting the phone bank down for the next 2 weeks, and the phoners are going on a long vacation. So in looking at the demographics, we feel that we do have a representative sample on all those key groups, whether it's age, households containing children, home ownership, all those key variables that we've seen in the past. The non-response rate, again, was 5%. Once we found them at home or set up appointments with them. Over 50% of the sample was completed via appointment. So it's when it's convenient for the person taking the survey, not when it's convenient for us to give the survey. And thus, the overall projectability to this is within plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases, is the statistical caveat. Up front, in looking at the data, I mean, as Brett mentioned, as you go forward with planning for 2019, a lot of districts take this time because you have the luxury of time, being 13 months away from a potential November referendum, to check in with the district. Look at the overall atmospherics and see if there are any issues arisen, anything that needs to be dealt with. Because you know on election day, the key value you want people to go in and do a cost-benefit analysis. How much does this cost? What am I getting? And not bring additional baggage. So on this, as we look at the atmospherics, the district's in very good shape. In 2017, when we did a survey very early in 17, the district is, and I was talking with Bill about this, it was almost like the district was on a sugar high. You'd had the successful referendum in 2015. The school buildings were being built. Everybody was very excited. And the ratings were absolutely off the chart. And so on a lot of these questions, I've kept that in there so that you can see there's been some drops. But what I've added is the data from the 2015 Pre Referendum Survey. So a similar point in time leading into that referendum to give you some context for where the numbers are at. So with that caveat, the one thing that
Sorry, I'm going to, just real quick on that last slide.
Yes.
So when you did do telephone, is that now cell phone and landline, or is it just landline?
Yes. Since 2008, it's been a mix. We started back at the 2008 point in time. There's just too many at that. And I believe this time around in the district, it was 44% cell phone only, 10%. There's still double digits out there with landline only. It's a certain demographic, and then the remainder have a combination. So it really depends on demographics, but it's about 50-50 now, being cell phone only households.
Is the non-response rate of 5%, is that pretty high among districts, or is that?
No, it's very low.
But that's what I meant, low.
Yeah, it's for the way we do sampling. We always consider we want to be within the 5 to 10% range. Right. The surveys you see on political items going on in the papers, those non-response rates will be 25-30%, because what they're doing is they're calling people over the period of 2 or 3 nights. If you don't answer the phone, you're a non-response. Well, you're biasing your sample against those with an active lifestyle. They give pollsters a bad name, in essence. And that's why, if you look, 400 sample over 12 days, October 1st through the 12th, my phoners could call this in 2 nights. But there's no point in doing the replacement and allowing for refusals and non-responses, because you're biasing it. Yes, you can, a lot of those surveyors reweight on demographics, but when you reweight on demographics, you're not taking in behaviors might be different. Just if you're an active person at 55 versus a non-active person at 55, doesn't necessarily mean they'll have the same attitudes.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks.
Super. So the one item that has remained stable. On this chart, we're asking the overall quality of education. Excellent, good, only, fair, or poor. This time around, 93% rated it favorably. Down 1 point from 94%. But what is important is the excellent rating. As we've talked before, whether it was myself or Bill talking to you, Minnesotans are difficult graders. They're not very enthusiastic, and excellent is a very stringent standard to reach with Minnesotans. There's always room to improve. So we had that jump from 13 to 17 going to 44%, and now it's remained stable over the course of the 1 year to 45%. The norm on this across the state right now is 22% excellent. So you're more than double, and you're historically up now. And that's important, because that's what differentiates districts. The 45% excellent places you within the top 10%. It's just outstanding. Now, What's the core value? What do they like most? And your folks have always grouped into 3 categories, and they're pretty equal, and they remain pretty equal. You have 25% that leads the list, personnel. But if we combine the variety of programming and broad curriculum, it's 28%, kind of the programming aspect. And then the academic quality in the classroom is also important to 25% plus the 2% achievement statistics, so 27%. Those 3 categories make up over 75%. That's what folks are viewing as the most important. So in planning and everything, you've always had a 3-pronged attack you have to take. All of these are important. Some districts, it's all about curriculum. Curriculum will be at 40, 45%. Others, it's purely statistics, academic quality in the classroom. You have to continue to be cognizant because all 3 are core values in this school district. Now, if we ask what they like most, we always ask what the most serious issue facing the district is. Now, keep in mind, both of this question and the previous one are open-ended. They can tell us whatever they want, and we collapse them down. What we always use as a standard on this is if you go over 25%, 1 out of 4 folks coalescing around one response, we consider it to be a major concern in the district. You don't have that. What leads the list this time is under 20%, 17% large class sizes. And we're going to delve into that a little bit deeper in the survey when we look at characteristics. High taxes at 11%. That's lower than we're seeing across the metro area right now. The norm on that is 15 to 20%. And we're going to look at taxes because for the first time, your perception of property tax hostility has dropped in this district, where we would not label you a hostile property tax climate anymore. Something has changed in their perceptions. Lack of discipline and lack of funding at 10%. Poor spending at 8%, and then everything else in single digits. So the key takeaway, what leads the list, and it's a moderate concern at this point, but we're going to see some data that's going to show it's a growing concern, is class sizes. And that, whether it's perception or reality, this taps into perception. This is what people are hearing very much. And then down at the bottom, if we look at the nothings, the boosters, there are no problems in the district. Almost a quarter of residents point to that. The norm on that is 8%. So it's 3 times higher booster core than we typically see across the metro. Now, one item there has been a drop is the quality compared to 3 years ago. Last year, 54% said it was better. This time, 30% said it's better. However, if you remember, you had that jump in the excellent rating. So when you have that, it went up by 50%, the excellent rating to 44% 2017. So there was more room to move, shall we say. The key on this is always the ratio that we look at with the district. The better to the worse. This time, you have 30% better to 5% worse. It's a 6-to-1 ratio. The norm on that is 2-to-1. So the district is still seen as moving in the right direction, but keep in mind, you do have less room to get better once you have almost a majority of people saying things are already excellent. Those folks fall into the about same category. Now, how about compared to the neighbors? We see a similar drop from the 2017 survey, but still, you have 42% saying the quality is better, 5% somewhat worse. Nobody said it's much worse. So on this one, we have an 8-to-1 ratio. Most districts, people feel good, even if they don't, it's a competitive, they want to say they feel that they're better than their neighbors. So the norm on this is actually about 4.5 to 1. So you're still running twice the norm on that comparison to surrounding school districts, feeling the quality here is better than worse. How about meeting the learning needs of all students, most students, some students, or very few students? We had a 10-point drop in the all, but the 65% in 2017 was the highest that we had across the state that year. It's still among the highest that we have in the last 5 years on that. The 55% still places you among the top 5. Very few districts have a flat majority of residents saying you meet the learning needs of all students. It's a stringent category to be placed in. So with the 55%, it's outstanding. When we asked those that said most or some, nobody said very few. You have 40%, and we follow up, and that's the writing in the upper right-hand part of the chart. Those percents reflect the percent of the 40%. So what groups of folks of students are they focused on? It tends to be the struggling ESL special education group that they feel perhaps are falling through the cracks. It's not unusual. This really has shifted. When I started doing this 25 years ago, on this question, it was an insatiable demand. It was gifted and talented. There wasn't enough. About 10 years ago, it shifted to average. Those folks were kind of both ends of the spectrum, and now over the past 3 years, there's been the shift to the struggling students, perhaps their residents' concerns. It really has followed this pattern over the past 20, 25 years. So you're not unusual in where the concern is on the type of students' needs not being met. Now, we ask a long list and ask folks to rate characteristics of the district. Excellent, good, only fair, or poor. I've collapsed the excellent and good and the only fair and poor into two categories to make the chart easier to read. And I've placed this on a hierarchy of rating for favorable. You can see a sea of blue, very little red across on key characteristics. What leads the list is the quality teaching staff, 96%. On the far right side, if there were statistically significant differences from 2017, from last year, I put the percent there, the difference. So the quality of teaching staff went up 6 points, favorable rating. Okay? Coming down the list, we don't have any statistically significant changes until we get to music, theater, and arts offerings. That went up 11 points in 1 year. Then we have the theme of class sizes that we started to see develop in the most serious question, or the most serious issue facing the district. And class sizes there are two components to it, and the first one is the personalizing of education. As districts kind of realize that sometimes, cutting a class size by one, parents realize that that doesn't have the impact for the cost. It's the personalization matters, and you can overcome larger class sizes. Perception on personalizing education for students, 75%, but it did drop 11 points. And then all three at the bottom, the class sizes, middle school class sizes dropped 11 points. Elementary class sizes dropped 25 points, and high school class sizes dropped 14 points. So that's why I say it's a growing concern. Districts, oftentimes when they're looking at bond referendums and discussing space issues, these oftentimes class sizes will be upside down, meaning there's more unfavorable than there's favorable ratings, say 55% unfavorable to 40% favorable ratings. Really kind of a hue and cry out there that residents see this need. You don't have that yet, but you do see this growing concern developing in the district over the past 18 months. Specific school district perceptions, and this is kind of the checklist that we use for districts as you're planning, because these things, if any issues come up, you have 13 to 14 months to communicate with residents about them. And nothing rises to the level. You still have outstanding ratings. On spending taxpayers' money effectively, efficiently, initially I just did the 17 and 18 comparison, and I thought, well, 16% down is kind of a concern. 86% was the highest that we had in the metro area in the last 3 years. So this is the point where I went back to the 2015, the Pre Referendum Survey, to look at that environment versus this environment. You can see it was 69% in 2015, it's 70% now. The 70% is outstanding. The norm on this is 52% right now. On good value for the investment, that really hasn't changed over the 3 studies. 9 out of 10 people say the public schools are good value for the investment. Do you ask for a property tax increase only as a last resort after all other alternatives have been considered? 68% in 2015, well, you had a referendum in the interim, and it went down 6 points. What we're looking for as a threshold there is 51%. So it's still in great shape. Have you spent past bond referendum funds responsibly? In 2015, we asked about 2013 referendum spending. In 2017 and 18, we asked about 2015 bond referendum spendings. So 64% in both of those categories. Threshold on that is 55%. And as long as you break the threshold on those 3 questions, spending taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently, only as a last resort and spending past bond funds responsibly, we consider the district to still have strong financial credibility with residents across the district. You not only meet those barriers, but especially spending taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently, you're much higher. The district has strong credibility. Now, the first time that we kind of dip our toe in a discussion of a property tax increase for schools is the schools are a good investment, and I would support a tax increase for it. We haven't told them if it's a bond referendum or an operating levy. This is just to gauge where people's support and opposition is. You can see you had 63% say yes, I agree with that. You had 70% in 2015. 27% said no, it was 24% in 2015. So very similar numbers on that core opposition, and that's what we're really looking at, that 27%, those are the core opponents. They don't have any information, and they're saying that they're against a property tax increase. Anytime that's between 25 and 30%, that's a manageable number. A few more perceptions, not so much based on finances. Adequate room in the district to accommodate residential growth. This is the first time, we asked in 2017, so we don't have any data going back to 2015 on this question. Last year, 88% said there was adequate room in the district. It's dropped to 69% over the course of a year. Kind of going on to that growing concern on space and class sizes. Safe learning environment, not an issue, 95%. When I say it's not an issue, residents are saying you're doing a good job with it. On the flip side, though, we didn't ask it, but I guarantee you with districts that have results like this, if you'd ask a property tax increase in a bond referendum to enhance safety and security at schools, you would have 80% still support. It really is one of those items, since Newtown, Connecticut, and the continued issues that you see nationally, it's an insatiable demand. You can never be too safe. Is technology improving learning? 2017, 91% said yes. This time, 76% said yes. Little uptick in uncertainty. And the district has always, with technology, been very specific that the need technology for technology's sake is not acceptable. It needs to be tied to curriculum and improving learning. And so it really is a key factor in communications and showing folks how technology is improving the classroom education. Do they trust the district to do right for children? Absolutely, 9 out of 10. Are you accountable? 87%, outstanding. Do you do a good job of involving the community? It was 79% in 2015. It jumped to the high that we had, 92% in 2017. Went back to 75% this time. It's no statistically significant difference between 15 and 18. The norm on that right now is about 68, 69%. So you're still running above the norm. Most districts always have 25% that say no. And oftentimes there's a difference between having the ability to have a say and getting your way. And that's influencing their disagreement or agreement on that statement. Now, I mentioned on the most serious issue facing the district that taxes were lower than what we're seeing across the metro area. When we hone on taxes specifically and ask for an evaluation of total property taxes, we see a statistically significant change. Last year, 59% rated their total property taxes as high. This year, 47% rate their total property taxes as high. About average went up from 35 to 46%. This places the district right on the threshold. What we always say is if you're over 50%, if more than half of your residents think your taxes are high, it's a hostile property tax climate. The 59%, and you've always typically been between 55 and 65% on the higher end of tax hostility. So what's happened over the intervening 18 months, there's less of a concern, but it's still a concern out there. Now, with school taxes, the green bar, it was 52% said their school taxes were high last year. This time it dropped accordingly 12 points, just like total taxes, to 40%. So once again, this is telling us that for those that do have a concern on taxes, it's not so much focused on the schools per se, it's focused on the city or county. We just don't know which the concern is. But the key takeaway is, at this point in time, there is a regression on property tax hostility in the district. Is the district adequately funded? 2017, you'd had the referendum, absolutely, 83%. Now we have a 17-point drop, 66% saying the district's not adequately funded. Disagreements up to 22% and uncertainties at 12%. So there is growing concern on the adequacy of funding in the district also. Job performance ratings. To not make the chart so busy, I didn't go back to 2015 and put the ratings on for all four groups. But the ratings for all four groups were consistent between 15 and 18. So with 2017, with the sugar high at 83 and 85% for the board and the superintendent, looking this time around, 68% favorable to 24% unfavorable on the school board. This one, we always look at ratio because the uncertainty varies from district to district. You're basically at a 3-to-1. The norm on this right now is 1.5 to 1, about 50 to 40, 55-40 for a school board rating. So you're running above the norm on that, very strong. The superintendent administration, similarly. Normally it's 2 to 1. This is almost 3 to 1. So both of these are still well above the norms, and they compare favorably from 15. It's just 18, or 2017 was so positive at that point in time. Now, principals still loved. They only dropped 7 points, 84%. And the teachers from the sugar high stayed on a sugar high, the evaluation of the teachers.
And well-deserved.
At 95%. There's really not room to grow on that when you only have 2% rating teachers unfavorably. An overall evaluation of financial management then, 67% this time rate the financial management as excellent or good, 27% only for poor. The norm on this right now is 55%. Very few districts go over 60%. This tends to be a very tight range in the 50s. The 67%, while it is a drop from 2017, compares, it's up 6 points from the 2015 survey. The district has financial credibility out there in the minds of its residents. So let's talk about some referendum planning questions as you move forward in the discussions with the community. What's folks' predisposition? If they heard a property tax increase was put forward, would they be against any property tax increase, for any property tax increase, or are they persuadable, for some and against others? You can see in 2013, and the difference we always look at is the against all versus the for all. You were a -9. You had 9% more opposition at the outset than you had support. In 2015, it went to a -3. This time, you're at a -1. You're getting almost closer to a net zero at the outset. The norm on this, in 2017, we worked on 28 operating and bond referendum questions, and the norm on those was 5% negative at the outset, and 26 out of 28 passed. So it's a manageable number. You can, though, see the polarization that's happened over this decade. From 2013, you had 60% of people persuadable. 2015, it dropped to half, and it remains at half. And this is what we see across the state. When districts have these conversations with residents and discuss a levy or bond referendum, keep in mind they don't have any idea what we're talking about the funding's for. This is just core opposition, core support. Most districts are in this position where half the people have made up their mind regardless of what it's for. Now the let's make a deal question. Bond referendum tax increase. This question, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the phoner picks a random starting point and moves up and down the scale depending on the respondent's answer. And so if the phoner says, would you support $12 a month? And the person says, yes, how about $18 a month? They say no, the answer is $12, or go up and down the scale. First off, the nothing, 32%. So if we go back one to the predisposition, you had 25% that in theory said they're against anything. Now we've asked for a dollar amount. It kind of flushes out the Minnesota nice aspect. I don't want to say no, but now you've asked for a dollar amount. And it's typical. The norm on this is anywhere when that range is 30 to 35% in core opposition. That's manageable. Every district has it. Now, your scale, and looking back at previous surveys, flipping through the files this afternoon, your scale was always, it was a ski slope down from the lower amount to the highest amount. You actually have a little bit more of a curve here where you have the most people saying $12 a month. It comes in at an average at right about $11, $12 at the outset. Now, boards always ask, is this set in stone? It's absolutely not set in stone. It's meant to give you an indication of at the outset what the comfortable tax increase is. Last year, in 2017, we worked with the district that at the outset, their comfortable tax increase was about $10 a month. But on the components they were looking at for the bond referendum, they did not have less than 70% support for a property tax increase for that component. They actually went for $27 a month, almost 3 times the dollar amount, and at $165.35. So what's in the package matters as much as the number. This number is flexible. The district can also pick to choose, and there was one district on the northern side of the city years ago that came in underneath the number, but it included a second sheet of ice. And it failed because that component became a lightning rod. What matters is the components themselves. It's only meant to give you an indication at the outset of a comfort point for residents. So when we break out the components, and this is framed up as a property tax increase for this component. Your folks are as practical as Minnesotans across the state have been over the last 5 to 6 years. This really has changed. In the 90s, when we asked this question, it was like making people eat their vegetables. Yeah, we have to do it, but you have 55% say yes. It leads the list in survey after survey with safety and security. 78% understand the need for deferred maintenance projects and would support a property tax increase for that purpose. Elementary classroom additions, 72%, keeping in mind the concern on growing class sizes. The larger bus garage, 55 to 40%, and then construction of a new elementary school, 54 to 41. So at this point in time, on the solution for the growing concern on class sizes, they're more interested in additions versus constructing new. So as the planning goes forward, it's part of the communication and the factors of, if this happens, how does this impact students versus this plan happening? But at the outset, none of these are what we would call deal killers. A deal killer on this list is when you have 30% support and 65% opposition at the outset, there's not a lot of room to move, folks, and it really can become a polarizing issue. This kind of sets the guardrails that it's a discussion the community is willing to have on how to move forward. So an overall evaluation on the idea of improvements, 63% say that the ideas sound good. 33% say they're a bad idea. If we look at intensity, there's not a lot of intensity on this, but it's 2 to 1 in favor of strong good idea versus strong bad idea. If they said bad idea, now this is 33%, and we ask, is there one component that if it was included in a referendum would cause you to vote against the package? 55% of the 33%. So roughly about 19% of the community said that they would vote against it if it included the construction of a new elementary school. On the bus garage, 30% of the 33%, so about 10%. On the new elementary school, I cut the data this afternoon because I was curious. It's almost a 1-for-1. If they told us that they were against any property tax increase and would support nothing, they opposed the elementary school. You're not losing people in the discussion on the construction of a new elementary school. They're already against at the outset. Does that make sense? Switching over from bond to operating, we have a paragraph explaining, because nobody knows the differences outside of school boards and administrations, the difference between operating funds and bond funds. You actually have less folks saying nothing on operating expenses, drops to 30%. Not statistically significant, but well within that manageable range. Going across then, it's about $10 a month at this point in time for a tax increase on an operating levy proposal. Now, what options would they support a property tax increase for use of operating levy funds? Not surprisingly, with a growing concern on class sizes, maintaining class sizes at 85%, maintaining curriculum and programs at 80%, closing the state revenue gap is really becoming an issue that some districts are talking about, and it is a powerful argument. 75% support that, and ensuring equity between your schools, 74% would support a property tax increase for that. Now, there's consistency. Your folks are, and always have been, consistent. You had I believe 54% say that they supported the construction of the new school. Well, 54% would support the funds to operate the new school. So you still have a majority there. But the top 4 categories are extraordinarily highly supported in concept. If they were included in a package, that $10 a month number could easily go higher when you have 3/4 of the population saying, I support a property tax increase in concept for that item. And then the final portion of the referendum package review is the renewal. And the renewal is, like most renewals, in good shape. Right now, 74% strongly support or support. Opposition, 20%. Always look at intensity on these questions. 5-to-1, strong support versus strong opposition. And then finally, on information sources, a few changes. The local newspaper has dropped in a year, statistically significant, from 32 to 24%. District newsletter went up a little bit, the website went up a little bit, but the grapevine is growing out here as a most credible source of information, from 7 to 13%, a doubling. We are starting to see this across the state right now on school district surveys. And right now, a hypothesis that we're going to be looking at moving forward is it seems to be in relation to the more electronic is used as a primary source of information, the more the grapevine develops and becomes lush. Because electronic sources of information require a proactive measure on the user's part. You can't force them to look at the website or go to social media or open an email. And there seems to be growing word of mouth in the grapevine in districts that are relying more and more on electronics. What's the most effective way? Still, at the top of the list, the mail newsletter. A third would like print. 19% local newspaper. Email at 18%, the website at 15%, social media at 5%, e-newsletter at 5%, and 4% are just honest and say, I'd prefer to receive my information via word of mouth. But if we look at print versus electronic at this point in time, you have 52% indicating they'd like either a newsletter or a newspaper in their hands, and you have 43% indicating electronic. So still a tip for preference in this district of print versus electronic. I believe that's the last. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions for Peter?
Oh, wow, really, really great work. Not surprising that our teachers are always beloved here. We have excellent teachers, so that was really good news and consistent. And kind of going historically up was interesting as well. It's interesting to me, and I don't know how, this isn't really a question, but there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the tax conversation and the adequate funding. Or am I wrong on that? It just seemed that I was surprised that they didn't feel like we were adequately funded when we just went out for referendum. I mean, do you see that normally?
You're regressing to the norm on that, and I probably should have talked about that.
Okay.
The norm on that right now, let me go back. I believe you were at 66% that said adequate funded. The norm on that right now is 60%. So you were extraordinarily high in 17 because of the referendum in 2015, with people saying, okay, it's adequate. So you're now pulling back to where we normally see. This shifted.
So we were adequately, okay, I misread that. So we were adequately funded in 2017 right after the referendum.
Yes.
That's why that was so high.
Yeah.
And now we're going back to, okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that. And then, did we dig into a little bit more on the whole new school issue? Because I was just a little surprised that originally the bus garage almost polled higher than the new school, which I didn't. I mean, I was shocked about the support for a bus garage. I thought we wouldn't get there.
We did only in following up if they said it was a bad idea, and then if there was one component, the new school. In side comments, because there are those that stay on the phone much longer than the norm,
Right.
the average of the 17, 18 minutes. And there was discussion rate. You built a school in 2015.
Right. It was too.
So it really does need to, part of the communication effort has to be to explain. People, we're talking about this on Friday, and I think it's a good example. Wayzata did this. They went in 2013 and built a new school, then had to do an addition on it, and then had to come back in 17 for a new elementary school that passed. You have the luxury, though, that they don't. They did not. In that your growth, every time I drive down here, there's another building up. I'm coming back to present to Chaska staff on Thursday morning at 7:30, and I expect to see 3 new buildings up every time I come down here. It's amazing. Wayzata, that growth that precipitated the need for that new school was in the northern edge of Plymouth. And for those of you that are aware, it's not really off of 494 where you can see it. They had to go out and communicate, show pictures of the developments being built for the people in the south part of the city. You have the luxury that people see the growth. Now they have to connect the growth to what residents equals students, students equal pressure in the classrooms.
Though I'm not sure, we have a pretty big district from a mile standpoint. So people on the east side of the district may not see that growth on the west side of the district as much. Now, I mean, in fairness, if you don't really drive around in the west side, if you don't go to the parade of homes, you don't really realize, and you should though, because those are really nice houses. But you could be kind of head in the sand a little bit on that.
I did cut the construction for new elementary school by the 4 areas in the district: Chanhassen, Chaska, Carver, Victoria. At this point in time, Chaska is at 53% support. Chanhassen is at 53%. Victoria is at 50%. And Carver and the township areas are at 60, I got tenths of percent, 62, 63%. So it's pretty consistent between Chanhassen, Chaska, and Victoria. The Carver area and the townships have the higher level, and I'm assuming that's where the primary growth would be on this edge.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's, yep, that was all my comments for now.
So just a quick question. Essentially, for our deferred maintenance or for our bond issues or potential bond issues, the data suggests around $12. And for our the referendum, it would be $10 a month, correct?
To start the discussion, it's a comfortable place to start the discussion.
Is there any tie-in between those two to determine, are the people who said $12 or whatever the same people that are telling us $10 that we can expect then $22?
Correct. They're in addition to. The survey specifically worded that way.
Okay.
First, we're going to talk about bond. Let's make a deal. question, talk about the bond, then we give them a paragraph explaining the differences between operating and bond, and tell them this is in addition to the amount you set on the bond.
Okay.
Yeah, so they are, you could say it's about $22 a month as a comfort level between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Going back to the slide you had about what operating levy funds would be used
Yep.
for, you had a fairly high percentage of people who wanted to ensure equity between the schools. Were people allowed to give examples of what they would consider, like items that they would want to target to have equity between the schools, or was that not an open-ended question?
It wasn't open-ended. It was closed-ended. And let me. What's the bond? Ensure equity between schools in the district, so each school offers students a similar quality of education.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you have numbers that show the effects that, obviously now we're a ways out from if we do have a vote, the impact that the selling the district does of the particular issues, is there a consistency with the impact that has on the final vote?
See, explain it if I understand, Fred.
If we're at right now, 56 or 60% of the people support a new building.
Mm-hmm.
That's before we've really put out
Yes.
any information.
Yep.
Is there a way to predict from our past what the effect will be of our convincing?
Yeah, can we do a concrete, plus or minus, you'll get 8 points on this. No, it's hard at this point in time because this is just gauging attitudes and perceptions. You do see that growing concern. And if the district, most districts now, as they go for bond referendum, especially in 2015 and 2017, have started this sequence where we kind of call this the Guardrail Survey. Came out of a client early this decade who did all this facilities planning, said, here's the package. We went out to the residents, and it didn't have a chance in heck of passing because the committee and the board, they didn't have any guardrails. Oftentimes then the guardrails are established and potential solutions come forward. And then they do a follow-up survey looking at solutions and messaging and communications and awareness. My guess is, and this is only a guess, because of that concern that we see growing on class sizes and personalized attention, that it will only increase people's perception on the need for additional classroom space. Where I think the discussion will hinge is the solution. Is it addition or is it new? And that impact. I think that's the part that's really in flux here at this point in time, and is expected to be. You haven't had discussions, with the community, the pros and cons of either. And so at this point in time in the new school, a lot of folks are just reacting to 2015.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I'll just jump in quickly because I think, Lisa, your question kind of related to that a little bit as well. So keep in mind, we've got our facility task force that is looking through our demographic information, the facility study piece, and they're going to come out in December or January and make a recommendation. That's what we think, you should consider. And kind of what Peter is alluding to, then we're going to come back out and do another survey at that time. Mm-hmm. You're probably also aware that even back into last year, we began talking about growth in the community. So we've had some consistent, and we'll continue to have consistent messaging around our demographic growth and construction in the community and the impact it's having, and potentially will have moving down the road. And a lot of times, even just this year, as I've done, a few presentations here and there, when you talk about growing 1,000 kids in the next 4 years and 700 elementary, they're like, whoa, I didn't realize that. Then it all makes sense. So the nice thing is we've already kind of set the stage with the communication, and then once we have that, whatever comes out of that committee work, and we do that next survey, we're going to see between now and then, have we made any difference in that, right? That's going to tell us a lot about our communications and whether that's continuing to resonate with the community in terms of moving that forward or not, right? So I think it does align really well with the kind of the plan we have laid out.
I would add that too, as you talk about student enrollment growth. One caveat: over the past 5 years, the selling point of potential growth in student enrollment and actual kids in chairs, it's the kids in chairs number that really resonates with people. There have been districts that have gone down the path of saying, we have projections for X hundred or X thousand more kids, and basically residents say, well, they ain't here yet. And then it fails, and they come back 2 to 3 years later, and the message now is, okay, we said that there were going to be 50 per class, we have 55. Okay, the projections are accurate. So actual numbers over projections are always a key when you're dealing with growth issues in building on referendums.
Yeah, it does tend to seem that the kids actually have to be there. And that's where the class sizes is interesting to me, because with opening Carver Elementary, I mean, we had some buildings that had class sizes just out of pure necessity, that there just wasn't another space in that building for another classroom, and so those class sizes were larger. But it's interesting to me. I mean, from a board standpoint, from a budgeting standpoint, our class sizes hasn't increased in, I don't know. I mean, when I first got on the board, we increased class sizes, and rightly so. We heard those numbers. So it's just interesting to me that's coming up.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I mentioned, class sizes is a perception issue.
It is.
And I do think that with the next survey, as you look at solutions, we need to put in, some districts move beyond just this, okay, how would you rate class sizes? And they say, okay, the average class sizes in elementary schools is X students. Too high, about the right amount, too low. The average class size in middle school, so you give people fact to operate on. Because it's different if they just hear, somebody, they're in the community and somebody says, oh, the class size is so large. I mean, my daughter's in 3rd grade. I don't know how many kids she has in the class. If you ground it with a number, the results are oftentimes different, because this is tapping into perception, and we do find different information when you tell them a number and ask too high, too low, or about the right amount.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about class sizes, we've toyed with it before, is, do we increase taxes to buy down class sizes? Right. And so is it that much of an issue that they would be willing to put their money where their mouth is? I'd be curious.
No, this really, I've been doing this a long time, like I mentioned earlier, and in the 90s, the discussion was all about lower class sizes. I would support property tax increase to lower class sizes. And then the discussion started happening, okay, it cost X $100,000 or X million to cut one kid out of the classroom. And even parents thought, that might not be the best. And that's where districts started to switch over to this personalized individual learning to help overcome that. Because if you ask somebody, your class size is 30, would you support a property tax increase to go down to 29? No. What's asked on this chart is, would you support a property tax increase to maintain? That's where the shift has happened. We don't even ask about lowering class sizes anymore. It's about the maintenance of class sizes. That's where folks want the stability, because there are still those that think you could cut 10 kids, but that's the budget number that's not realistic. But you ask them, if you cut one kid, that's probably not worth that number. So it is the maintenance, but tying it to, and most districts do that with curriculum and programming and everything, with that personal, individualized learning.
Yeah, interesting.
Peter, just real quick, would you be able to cut the class size question by community?
I did. Okay. Would you be curious?
Yeah, I would be curious.
Okay. All right, I'll go back to the overall. So overall elementary class sizes, it's 60-30. Chaska, 54% favorable. Chanhassen, 68% favorable. Victoria, 55% favorable. And the rest, the Carver and rest, 56% favorable. Interestingly, nobody in Carver and the townships rated elementary class sizes as excellent. It was 56% good. On the middle school, where we have 64% overall, rating them favorably, Chaska is at 60%. Chanhassen is at 73% favorable. Victoria is at 57% favorable. Nobody rated them excellent. In Carver, 53% rated them good in Carver and the townships. And then the high school, we had 56% overall. Chaska, 56%. Chanhassen, 61%. Victoria, 50%. And Carver and the townships, 34% favorable. Nobody, in Carver, not one resident, I mean, it's 8% of the sample, but not one person rated any of the class size areas as excellent. All those numbers were good. So the concern tends to be coming out, and thus, when I broke down the construction of the new school, the Carver area had the highest level of support. But it does appear, it's statistically significant differences. Chanhassen would be the variation higher on elementary and middle school class sizes, and on all three class sizes, the Carver portion of the district is lower than the norm.
Interesting. Thank you.
Peter, this is great. It's I think as you kind of sum this up, what's helpful is a guardrail, right? Because it takes the pulse of where the district is in terms of helping to form our opinions and look at what those resources are and where that is. So from that standpoint, I think it's a really helpful starting point. I was a little surprised by the deferred maintenance. And I know that we had some communication in the district about the same time. So this survey come out after that? Was this survey, when did it start and when did it finish?
October 1st through the 12th.
All right. And Brett, all the deferred maintenance stuff, that was communicated prior to that? Is that right? Would have been. Because how did that compare again to previously? Was there a big jump in deferred maintenance, support for deferred maintenance compared to previous years?
Don't have the 15 survey. Did we ask deferred maintenance in 15? I'd have to check on that. But I mean, it really is curious, like I mentioned, that deferred maintenance used to be like getting them to eat their vegetables.
Yeah.
And now, since the recession ended, about 2012, 2013, these high levels of support for deferred maintenance,
So you're seeing this, as you mentioned, across district. Right?
Absolutely.
It's just not our district, but.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was curious how much of a potential communication bias we may have from, having that communication right before your survey.
I would just answer that question. So far, all of our communication about deferred maintenance has been targeted at parents. Our first sort of brush with the community is going to happen right after the election. So if it is sort of predisposing a population to support it or have it as a concern, it'd really just be parents, not the general community.
And how many parents took this survey?
It was, this time around,
The communication on maintenance.
survey says, I believe 33%.
33%, okay.
Yes, 33%.
So not an overly large bias in that sense.
Right.
No, it's very curious from that standpoint.
Yeah. Although, I think, you talked about it, we're practical people, and, and anybody who owns a house,
Understands it.
God knows, understands it, yep.
Especially coming out of the recession where a lot of that was pushed forward. And,
Pushed on, yes.
And pushed off, and a lot of districts had a lot of bad stories to tell about waiting, what happens on deferred maintenance. And it's typically, if safety and security measures are on a bond referendum list, it will lead the list. But 9 times out of 10, second place will be deferred maintenance.
And then class size.
Actually, the growing item right now on bond referendums we're seeing across the state is additional space for career, technical, and vocational education programs. It is shifted. the more practical side, it kind of gets back to meeting the needs of all students. College not potentially being for everyone. So getting them ready for college or a career. And, you know, we're seeing 75% support in some very conservative districts for career tech space. It really is a growing.
Did you ask that? Was that part of our survey?
It was not part of the components that we tested here.
Wow, well, maybe it should be.
I mean, it makes sense. You hear that out in the community a lot as well in terms of how do we build up that side and get students ready for that. I did like how you framed up to, class size was clearly a large topic. And just that if it does lead to the task force of asking for another facility, the communication that's required to say, we just built one, why do you need another one? And that's how that fills the void. So it's nice to know the support is there.
Right.
It appears to be more on the messaging side, depending on what that solution comes to.
The topic is ripe. Yes.
Perfect. Any other questions, board members? Peter, nice job.
Thank you
It's very
so
helpful.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Very much.
With that, we move on to architect and engineering firm selection. Dee Dee.
Good evening. I have a couple guests with me tonight, but in an effort to continue to review its contracts with service providers, the district submitted a request for qualifications for architectural and engineering services. The district received responses from 6 firms, and 4 firms were selected for interviews on October 5th. The review team included Superintendent Christopher, myself, Amy Ledoux, Joe McGough, David Breck, June Johnson, and Ron Meyer representing the school board. The team recommends Wold Architects and Engineers as the district's architect firm, and Cargis Falconbridge Incorporated, or KFI, as the firm for mechanical and electrical engineering. And the board will be asked to approve the AIA agreements at the November 12th board meeting. With me tonight, I have Sal Bagley from Wold Architect Firms and Randy Christensen from KFI. Just wanted to introduce them to you. They would be part of the team that we would be working with. Both firms have pretty large support and teams that would be working within their organizations to bring forward any future design. They'll be doing some review of our buildings coming up. I know both firms have plans to take another tour of our buildings as well. They have both received copies of our facility task force information, as well as those observation sheets which we provided to you, and the detailed lists that support that as well. So no action for you tonight, just letting you know that this will be on the agenda for the board meeting on November 12th. Do you have any questions for me?
Oh, welcome.
No? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Did they put you through a good interview process?
They did.
Did they put you through the ringer?
Yeah.
They did.
That's what we want to hear.
But I would like to thank Dee Dee and the interview team. I was actually on 2 different teams, so some of you saw me twice, but it was a very interesting process. But we look forward to the opportunity to working with the district.
Excellent.
Good.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, with that, we move on to district dashboard indicators. Clint.
Yeah, so we have before you again, these are results from last year. So we're always kind of about a year behind, and we'll collect some of that information. So now we've got 3 years of data here. We can begin to see some trends, and as you know, we had a lot of discussion on what these indicators should be, and a lot of discussion about what the targets should be. And at some point, and I think Jeff, you might have mentioned, we just got to get started. We got to get something out there, and we can always adjust. And we've done a little bit of that each year, and so we'll talk about as we move through this. And so the indicators are really built around the 4 pillars of exceptional personalized learning, safe and nurturing learning environment, prudent management of public resources, and a culture of communication. Those are the 4 pillars that the board has established, and that's in board policy. So we really wanted to try to create these indicators that are a good cross-section, right? And develop a target that kind of created a threshold, if you will, as long as it's in that range. So we're not necessarily super worried if we don't hit a target, right? Because we're going to have variation in that from year to year. But as we start to see trends, are there areas we need to dig into deeper? So we'll jump into the student achievement pieces, looking at early childhood. And if you remember last year, initially the first 2 years, we had our targets set at 50%, and we were blowing those out of the water. So we've adjusted those to 60%, and you can see we're still doing really well. So that's positive to see. As we look at how kids come into the district, they're performing very well, and we're growing them the way we'd like to see that. Moving into third grade, again, we see a lot of positive results there. The one area that we didn't hit and we've yet to hit is that students reading at reading level, at grade level with Fontes and Pinnell. Now, I was glad to see that it went up from the previous year. We talked a little bit about this last year, that I don't necessarily think that was a reflection of where kids were actually reading. Some of it was about how that assessment was being administered. So we did more professional development. And the other thing that we did last year that won't be necessarily reflected in the data until we look at it again next year is now we're all using at the elementary level the same exact assessment for that. So in the past, you might use this particular assessment, and we can correlate it to that same number for Fontes and Pinnell. And it's just how buildings had kind of developed some of their reading assessments. But since then, we've streamlined that, so everyone's using the same thing. So with more professional development, streamlining that assessment, I think we're going to get better results. And I think that's why we've seen that climb, and I want to continue to see that climb. So right now, I'm not recommending that we change the target, because I still think it's important. I want to see how we continue to trend on this particular indicator. So I'll move into fifth grade. Again, outside of the pre-algebra ready, and that's on a MAP target. We set that target at 70%. We've yet to hit that. So that might be one. I'm hesitant to change it right now just because we've done a lot of work around math, and we've seen some growth at the third grade level. I want to see if that starts to translate to some additional growth here on that measure down the road. May we adjust that a little bit? Possibly. Maybe 70% is too high, but for right now, I'd like to just keep it there and continue to monitor that. It doesn't stand out as an area of concern, but again, I think some of the work we've done at the elementary level and some of the progress we've seen in third grade should begin to reflect in that fifth grade as those kids age up into fifth grade from third grade. Excuse me. Eighth grade, again, we made some growth in the, one area that we made significant growth was students reading at the college. So a 1200 Lexile is essentially college level reading ability. That jumped really high last year from 30 to 41%. So again, it'll be interesting to see where that falls next year. Does it fall back in line? Do we have just a particularly really strong group of readers last year in eighth grade? So that was kind of an outlier. Again, it's great to see, especially if we could keep that measure consistently. But the other two that we've yet to hit are the exceeds in reading and math. And we really haven't been close to those yet. So those might be ones that we start to look at. Maybe was that an appropriate target for us? I still think it's a good measure for us to look at, but maybe adjusting the target a little bit.
Just real quick on that,
Yeah.
Clint. I mean, so if someone's at 1200 on the Lexile,
Sure.
would you assume that they would be exceeds? I know they're two different tests, but that student caliper and
Yeah, so there's an interesting difference in MAP and MCA, and I see this with my own kids. So typically our MAP results are a lot stronger, right? And there's various reasons for that, but one of the reasons is kids have multiple opportunities on the MAP test because it's a dynamic test. So if all kids who take that test, they get half the questions right and half the questions wrong. It's designed that way. So if you're answering questions right, it gets harder and harder and harder. And then if you start getting more questions wrong, it changes the level, right? So for somebody like my daughter who is really anxious with tests, right? She's got one shot at this question on the MCA. And a lot of those questions build in difficulty as you move through the test. And so by the end, some kids just shut down. Where in MAP, it adjusts to it. So it kind of always, it gets to your level where it's challenging, but it may not put you to the point of frustration. Actually, what I've seen, again, this is history with this test for a long time. The kids who struggle the most with MAP are our gifted kids because they're not used to getting questions wrong. And so if I get half of them wrong and I'm used to getting all my questions right, by the end of this test, I might be really upset. Like, I just did terrible. But for kids who struggle, I got half of them right. That's pretty good, right? So it's a very different test in terms of how it's administered. And I think that's why we get some different results in that too. So again, it's just a measure. And when they look at how you've done on that reading test in MAP, they correlate it back to a Lexile level. And we use that correlation. So it doesn't mean that we could take an 8th grade kid, plop them into, a freshman lit class at the University of Minnesota, and they're going to pass with flying colors, right? But again, consistent with the results, typically they're reading at a very high level, which is a good measure for us. But I see your point too. If it doesn't, there is a disconnect with our exceeds level, but that's part of, I think, the issue with that too. So.
Which is helpful, because we talked a lot previously about MCAs, and it's just helpful, another data point to look at.
So I have a daughter who would, on the MAP assessment, and she reads a ton. She reads constantly. And I can remember this from her middle school MCA test. She was getting 90 percentile on MAP scores, which correlated with what we saw from a parent standpoint and what's happening in the classroom. MCA, it showed her as making progress. She wasn't at even meets in reading. So it's a very different score because on that measure, it's just how she feels when she's taking that test. So that's, again, it's a good reason we have multiple measures in here to give us that better snapshot. So we're not just looking at one test. Okay?
Before we get off that, and I don't want to get too far off the topic, but so on the MAP test, does it tell them that it got something wrong, or does it just adjust the questions? I mean, does it say this is wrong?
It just adjusts the question.
So they don't know if they got it right or wrong. It just
but they kind of get back into that range like, okay, I think I can, this one seems different.
Okay.
So, good question. Okay, so we'll continue to monitor that, and we may adjust that exceeds just a little bit to see. Again, the idea was not that we kind of want to create that threshold, right? So if it's falling below that, we're getting concerned, but if it's above that, or if it's growing, we kind of feel good about that. So I want to take a closer look at that. The high school results. We saw in the last 2 years, we've seen a drop in the AP, the percentage of students graduating who score at least a 3 on the AP exam. This is another good reason we have a cross-section of indicators on this, because it's like, wow, that's different, right? But one thing that kind of jumped out at me is, and because I know this from some of the other conversations we've had with teaching and learning, we have an increase in the number of students taking online and PSEO, especially at Chan High School. Right? And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of them just, they need a kind of a break in their schedule because they're taking a lot of rigorous courses to begin with, right? So as that number has jumped higher, that's when we saw the corresponding drop in this indicator of AP the last 2 years. So when AP sends us the results, we can see by school. We dropped, it was about 100 students that took an AP test at Chanhassen High School compared to the previous year, right? So that's a big jump. However, on both for Chaska and Chan High School, the kids who took the tests, who actually scored a 3+ on those tests, was the highest we've seen it. So they're scoring really well on the AP test. So I've talked to David Breck. This is an indicator. I think I like having the AP indicator on there. We may just want to look at how we've written it there, because I'm afraid we've created a situation where the number of students testing has a greater influence than the actual performance on the AP exam, which, again, would give us different data. So we just want to relook at this one. Again, I'm not necessarily concerned how students are performing, but that number of students testing is now. But it's another good reason for us to look at why are kids taking more online and PSEO options, and are we meeting their needs the way we need to be? Do we need to be making some changes there? Okay, so again,
there's a cost associated with taking an AP exam.
There is.
So,
but there are ways that we can, if a student's on free and reduced lunch, there's ways that we can.
I mean, just as long as that's widely communicated and that people feel like, they don't want. I don't want anyone to not take that test because they don't feel like they can afford it. And that's what would make me nervous about using that as a number.
Yep.
Garza.
And to your point, I mean, a percentage of that may be a secondary indicator on there, right? Of those who take it, what percent scored 3+? Correct. So you take out that variable associated with if someone else has found a different avenue.
I think one of the things, reason we did that initially too, is because we've seen an increase in the number of students taking the AP and the diversity of students taking the AP. And Fred, I know you always talked about that when we would present AP data. Are we just creating this for the kids who are already performing well? What about kids who struggle? Are we providing them with rigorous opportunities as well? And we saw a growth in that. And so we don't want to lose sight of that. And I'm not sure the kids, again, I think we have to take a closer look at that. So it's important to look at that and ensure we're encouraging all kids to take rigorous courses. We just want to make sure we've established the right indicator for that. So we'll take a second look at that. And we dropped a little bit in our ACT, a composite of 24. Again, at one year of that, I'm not necessarily concerned about that yet. We'll see where we come back next year, whether we need to dig into that deeper. We did see, our ACT scores, we dropped a tenth of a point, and the state dropped about a half point. So there was a bigger drop across the state than what we saw, and that might have some influence on that indicator.
Lynn, can you remind me, why did we choose 24?
24, a composite of 24 is really strong, right?
Right, it is.
And that's why we've kind of created that, because 22 would be the kind of college readiness benchmark. Right. But again, if we feel like we're doing a better job of that, should we see that number be higher than that?
Right.
So, I'm still comfortable with 24. I think it's good to set that as a challenging number because we should have kids performing at that high level.
And I don't disagree, but I would be curious at how many of our students off the bat were college ready, did hit that 22.
We can look at that as a secondary number. I can bring that to you.
Right, maybe.
Yep. The second, right after that, is a new indicator, and that's growth. Initially, we had an indicator that was from Explore to ACT. Okay.
Right.
And ACT, in their infinite wisdom, got rid of the Explore test.
Right.
So we had to scratch that as an indicator. But we are using the pre-ACT, and they'll take that as sophomores. So essentially, when we had the Explore to Plan to ACT, we had 3 to 4 years of data on kids. And so we'd be looking across those 3 years about 3 points of growth. And that's why we initially established 9 points of growth or higher on that measure. And so with only 1 year, we're looking at 3 points. What ACT would typically tell you is 2 points of growth is about average or good growth. So again, we want to look at, are we pushing kids even further than that? So the percentage of kids with 3 points or more in a year. That would be strong growth across the board, okay? So again, I want to monitor that. So it also gives us an indication as we move forward, we may have a reduction in the number. So let's say our scores drop by that 1/10, but maybe their growth was higher than it's been before because it's not the same kids, right? So it gives us a better indicator of the, as we look at variability between classes of students, how they're doing in terms of both growth and overall achievement. So that's why we've included in there. I don't necessarily have a target yet. We know we've got 44% this year. We'll look and see where that comes in next year, and that'll help us establish what that target should be. But that's why that piece is in there, okay? The achievement gap, and this came from conversation we had last year. We didn't have anything in there, and as a board, you said, hey, we'd really like to have that indicator in there as well. So what we've done for achievement gap is the information we get back from the MCA, they will tell us kids who are proficient, which ones had low, medium, and high growth. Kids who are not proficient, who had low, medium, and high growth. So the target that we're looking at are kids who are not proficient and the percentage of them that are making high growth. And high growth would be more than a year's growth. And so if we're going to kind of bridge the gap for kids, they have to grow more than a year. So that's an important indicator that we've had now for the first year. So that's something we want to continue to include and watch. As we continue to develop MTSS and intervention supports for kids, and providing better opportunities in win time, we want to see the number of kids non-proficient making those high levels of growth. Again, if we're going to close the gap, that's how we're going to do it. Okay. So again, we've got those as initial measures. Those are kind of to be determined also as we get some trend line on that and kind of see where we're growing. Then the graduation rate, again, we held steady at 92%. I include the by building in there, so it goes Chanhassen, Chaska, and then the IAA. So we stayed stable. This was, again, from a previous year, but the IAA jumped up to 44%.
That's excellent.
Which is really good. There's a lot of variation in the IAA, though, so we're going to see that from year to year. It may be, 25% one year and 45% the next. So, but again, we'll look at it overall.
It's a smaller class, so a couple more kids graduate, and that makes a huge number in that.
And the thing, especially with the IAA, at some point, graduating in 4 years is somewhat irrelevant. You need to graduate.
Yeah.
That is the most important thing. So when you look at our 5-year, 6-year trends, they're much, much higher than that, even for the IAA. And that's an important measure too. So we'll leave it in there as that 4-year graduation rate, and we'll continue to update that. That comes typically after the first of the year, so we're always even a little bit further behind on that one. Okay? So moving into safe and nurturing learning environment, we do have some scores in there now for a number of years we didn't have a consistent survey for parents, staff, and students, and now we do. And so we've got some numbers in there. They're not at that 4-point level. But again, now that we have a consistent survey, we can kind of monitor those and see if we're moving the needle on those. So this is really the first year we've had all 3 scores in for parents, staff, and students. Okay. High school activity, the participation and involvement, we did get that number finalized at 75%. Again, it remains very, very strong. It's really important. That's part of the reason we have 2 high schools is to provide more opportunities for kids. We know the more involved they are, the more likely to graduate, either have a better job, graduate from college. I mean, there's a lot of indicators just from being a participant in activities at the high school level. So that's something that has stayed strong, and we want to make sure it stays strong. Prudent management of public resources. Again, you've seen the audit reports that has continued to be very, very strong, and even our community reflects that belief in the work we're doing financially. And then the last one is student enrollment, and that's our capture rate with kindergarten students. We've not yet hit that 80% target, but we're getting really close.
So
you can see it. You can see it.
Yes.
Again, not one that I think we need to change, but we've got some good trend history there, and we want to continue to push the needle on that one as well. Okay. So, and again, in general, I think when you look at that cross section, we're performing really well in all of those indicators. But it also gives us areas to see further growth as we, so we do better communication, better professional development, and are we seeing the growth as we meet the needs of all of our learners? Are all those indicators moving in the direction that we want? With that, I'll put it out there for questions.
How do we communicate this to the public?
We haven't done a lot with this other than presenting it at a public meeting.
Yeah. I don't know, I'd be curious, because this, in some ways, I mean, there's some good numbers on here. There's definitely some more areas for growth. But, I don't know, I'd like to kind of explore how we talk every time, we get those MCA scores and we talk about, that's one indicator, and we put this together specifically so that we could have a more well-rounded approach. And I just would like to explore ways of communicating this.
And that gets to be tricky because,
totally.
because numbers, one person can look at 65% and say, that's not good at all. And others can say, that's fantastic, because they know maybe a little bit more where it came from or what the raw number actually means. That I'm all for transparency and openness, but with some education first as to what the numbers mean before people overreact or underreact.
Totally fair point, because, if for laypersons, some of these numbers, you're right. It's like, really? You're plotting a 40, one for, let me just pull one of these. Meets or exceed fall to spring, 65%.
Yeah, but what I think is nice about this, right, and you pointed this out at the beginning, is now we're in year 3 of this, right? So now we finally got 3 years of trending, and you're absolutely right. I think it was good to start somewhere. So 2 things that I really appreciate and encouraged by this. One is if we just look at early kindergarten through 8th grade, right, 11 of the 19 indicators have gone up in the last year, right? Mm-hmm. So that's almost a 60% increase in how we're capturing achievement, just not an MCA, but different ways of looking at it, which I think is encouraging. I think that gives you a lot of good drive that the practices that are out there are moving in the right direction. But it also highlights some of the holes, right? I mean, as you mentioned, the reading, maybe that is too high, but if we do look at the benchmark, it's gone up, it's gone down, it needs a little more trending, but it does seem like it's driving some of those decisions in where do we go. But for me, it does help with the MCAs. When I do look at those, I say, where's the disconnect on this?
Right, and that's what frustrates me, is because that is a one indicator, and this sort of balances some of these out.
It makes you feel a lot better about what the health of the district is in education and academic achievement.
Well, totally, and in measuring personalized learning, right, and where that is.
Yeah, because we're neutral on 2, and then 6 of the indicators went down,
right.
A percentage or so. So.
I mean, and I'm the achievement gap numbers, I think those are the right targets, because you're right. If they're non-proficient, then we need to really hit at high growth. But I would, just because that's so important, are they making growth at all? I mean, can we dive into that just a little bit more and have a little bit more robust numbers around that, just because it is so important? And because I believe in my heart that personalized learning is the tool for that achievement gap. So is there another way that we can look at that? And I think these are the right numbers, but can we pull more data? And then on the other hand, your whole job can't be this dashboard. So just like to think about some of these things, but
and I think
need to draw a line in the
there's
sand,
going to be some really good conversation around, are there pieces of this we need to include in the MCA presentation that you're not getting, right? So are you getting it different ways? This is kind of that one snapshot of information, and then are we digging deeper into more specifically with the MCA and closing the gap? I think, some of the challenge with that, and part of the reason we chose the high growth piece, so we may have 75% of our kids at medium growth, right, that are non-proficient. So that could be really good, but it's never going to be enough for them to close the gap.
Right, and that's what we need to do to close the gap.
And that's why we kind of went with that high growth piece, and then we'll continue to monitor that and continue to try to push that to higher and higher levels. The other piece that comes along with this, especially when we talk about MCA, different from MAP, because MCA is it's the high jump bar, right? And it says everybody in 4th grade has to get this high, right? And in some ways with personalized learning, if we tear the lid off grade level and we let kids go, we could actually be increasing that gap, right? If we're always comparing this student to this student. What we really need to be comparing on with closing the achievement gap is to that bar. So we're moving more kids to that bar in terms of closing the gap, as opposed to looking at the highest kid and the lowest kid and seeing what the variation is. So again, I think that's why that MCA measure on getting them to that bar is the important piece for us to continue to monitor.
Okay. Thanks.
I do agree with you, though, Lisa, at some level of thinking about how maybe we can communicate this, because I think it does resonate with what you saw in the survey, too, and that's the accountability and the value base of the education. And I think this is just a nice way of demonstrating how, the district is watching this from multiple angles and how there is growth that continues to build. So I don't know how to communicate that yet, but it would be interesting to see if there's a message around that to help inform the community.
Well, he's sort of the boy wonder in communication. So, hey, I trust you on figuring this out there.
But no pressure.
Boy wonder.
I think those lines One of the things that stuck out to me as you went through this, and obviously there's been a lot of conversation at the state level as well in terms of early childhood and pre-K, and how important that is to really set those kids up for successful education, K through 12. And looking at how we've consistently went up is just a great testament, I think, to the work that we're doing, and Jackie and her team, as well as our kindergarten teams. And I think that's a story that needs to be told, because that's great work that's happening at the earliest levels of our system. And so I think that's part of the conversation as well, and part of the story that needs to be told.
Any other comments?
I'm sorry if this is a question I should know the answer for. When we're talking about the achievement gap, where are we measuring that? I mean, what's the beginning point and the ending point for when we're saying we're achieving our goal? Is it K-12 all the way through? Is it 9-12? Is it first grade to second grade?
With these numbers in achievement gap, we're looking 3rd through 8th grade.
What grades? I'm sorry.
3rd through 8th,
Okay.
testing on the MCA. So it's all students who test MCA. We don't include the high school because they test in, I guess we could include 9th grade in there because they test in reading in one grade level and math in another. But it's not consistent across the board except for 3 through 8. So looking at that full population there on that MCA test.
So it's just through the MCA.
Correct.
Will a parent who has a fourth grader be able to look and see, if they're concerned about the achievement gap, the difference between 3rd grade and 4th grade?
There are growth indicators, and I'd have to look at the actual report that parents get on that. I'm not sure what it includes, which also tells you I haven't looked at my kids.
I have a 4th grade. I don't think it does do that. So.
I'd have to look at that. So one of the ways we've tried to get, MAP does a good job of measuring growth. Right? And if kids are growing in MAP, theoretically they should be growing on the MCA, even though we're going to have some variation because of the test itself. So that's one of the ways. It just does a better job. It's just designed to do that. So that's one of the ways we've tried to, like even with buildings, as we talk about buildings setting their goals, they set them in the MCA, but they want to live in MAP data, because MAP is more of the where did they start and where did they end this academic year. Yeah. Right, and that measures the growth. It gets kind of washed out when you test once a year, and then how much happened after that test or before that test, and they really weren't necessarily designed to do growth in the MCAs. I don't have a great answer, but again, that's part of the reason with the snapshot we have. We have MAP indicators, we have MCA indicators, we have AP, we have ACT, we have growth measures on the ACT. So just trying to get as many different ways to look at overall performance as opposed to just MCA.
So Clint, with that, on the achievement gap, the measurement that we have, the 24% and the 33% with those students that are high growth, that's on the MCA.
Correct.
Is there a way with this that we could, because the rest of the dashboard is really designed because we didn't want to just take one assessment as our kind of our gauge on how well we're doing, but yet we're just using one for that really important piece, which is the achievement gap. Can we, obviously I know that they have different intentions, but can we bring in a piece of the map or some other element to that? To obviously, if we measure them on the MCA for those non-proficient proficient math students with high growth, we're at 24%, but then is there a way to showcase on here how many of those students still achieve growth on the map, but maybe didn't test out that way on the MCA?
See, the hard part is with MAP and MCA is MAP doesn't care what grade you're in. They just let you go. You can just continue answering questions and go, right? And MCA is really designed to get to that bar. So as we're measuring growth towards getting to that bar as a measure of are we closing, if we get everyone to that bar, then we really, everyone's at least where we believe they should be at that grade level, right? So we do have some measures in MAP. but I just don't know how we'd combine them all together to give you a number that, would, that would make sense and would be
I
valid.
guess my question is, so 24% this year of the non-proficient math students had high growth on the MCA. So of that 76% that did not, is there a way to show how many of that 76% achieved growth on the map?
Right.
And we could look at that. I don't know, again, how they'd actually perform on the MCA compared to that. So what MAP will give us is it'll say, here's a kid that in the fall, based on their growth last year and where they're at this fall, they're a high growth, high achievement kid. So like if you think of a square, kids in the upper quadrant they're probably going to be meets or exceeds on the MCA, and they're growing at a high level, right? So in general, those kids are doing pretty well. And you got another quadrant over here where they're projected to meet on the MCA, but they're maybe not growing the way we'd like them to grow, okay? Then you have kids that are high growth, but they're not going to make it. They're still not kind of where they're, and then you have the lowest kids. They're not projected to make it, and they're not growing the way they want to. Again, we need to look at those kids specifically, but I'd have to think more and maybe bring in some more teaching and learning to see if there's a way to pull all of that together into a different indicator for you. So.
Well, and not to continue to throw a monkey wrench into this, but I mean, I like that we're looking at achievement gap. It's a little bothersome to me that we're not looking at third grade until third grade, because by third grade, kids should know how to read. And a long time ago, and I don't want to get in, well, I might as well, I'm getting into a story. Alan Page was a speaker at an MSBA conference, and I think I shared this with you. When he played for the Purple, when he was on the offensive line, the Purple People Eaters, they used to get the defensive line together, and they'd have to read the playbook. And his words were, I'm not sure if you've ever read an NFL playbook, but the hard words are offense, defense, tackle. And 5 out of those 9 guys didn't know how to read. They all graduated from college. And he said they didn't not learn how to read in college or high school. They didn't learn how to read kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. So I feel like there's a place that we really need to look at kindergarten, first, and second grade and find out where they are at and get them when they're young.
MCAs don't start until third grade, though. So
No, I understand that, which means that we'd have to look at another measure.
For a different tool.
We need a different tool, right.
Reading levels in kindergarten, first, second. Third grade's kind of that year where they talk about switching from reading to learn to learning to read.
Right.
Or learning to read to reading to learn, right? So it's a really important kind of year in that. So that's why we have, the indicators of the read well by third grade from the state level. That's why we've kind of chosen this. And so we can kind of group multiple indicators as opposed to having, so the indicator we have for you, we've got one in second grade. We've kind of got them all over the board. So how do we kind of streamline that? It's not that we're not looking at it.
No, I
previous
understand.
To that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, to your point, that's part of the reason we've gone to standards-based learning.
Oh, I know.
So we're not just getting a score. We're looking at specifically what things do you need to master, and then ensuring that you get there. So we don't have kids that we're just passing on with all these gaps that can graduate from high school and not know how to read.
Right.
That's a real problem.
It's a problem.
And again, I think that speaks to the work that we're trying to do and part of the reason behind that. So, again, I think we are looking at that. Buildings are looking at that. They look at it in their data teams. They look at it in their I teams as they're looking at students and who's kind of where they need to be and who needs additional supports, whether it's win time or additional interventions. So, again, I didn't necessarily want to include a lot of indicators here. So how do we streamline to hit the kind of the big targets that we need to? And kind of, again, so within third grade, we can kind of see multiple measures in that as well, as opposed to just 1 or 2 indicators.
Right.
Not to add more work to the staff, but maybe there's some way we can build in before third grade or even through third grade and above. Something where there's a red flag that a teacher can draw attention to and say, Johnny is at this point, I'm concerned that he's not where he should be, that there is an achievement gap here, so that people are at least aware of it. And it doesn't just go from I see it and it dies right there, but it has to be passed on then to whoever the next teacher is going to be.
And so that is happening with our I teams, and that's also part of the reason we're developing the MTSS system. So it's not only, yes, I see that there's a need, but it's also now what do I do, right?
Yeah.
What other additional supports and interventions can we give to the student to ensure that they're getting to where they need to be, right? So that's the whole process around MTSS, and that's where we continue to work so that there are those ongoing, and we are measuring, the kids who are reading at the appropriate level at the end of kindergarten, at the end of first grade, at the end of second grade, and third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, right? We don't necessarily include them all in here, but we are measuring those. And there are mechanisms to ensure that teachers are looking at, if they're not where they need to be, they take it to the building I team to talk about, here's what I'm seeing, here's the data I have, and then they provide additional supports in terms of, here are the interventions we need to look at, and they revisit that and see if there's progress. So
That deals with your issue. Once
Yes.
that becomes part of the culture, and it's
Right.
just an automatic that it's just being done,
Right, and maybe that's the measure, right? I mean, it could be just as simple as, are we flagging and doing interventions at that level? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make this too complicated, but I just feel like third grade, really is that turning point. I mean, that's where a lot of kids level off. That's where they learn how to read. But if they don't know how to read, to your point, by third grade, we're in deep trouble.
it's 2 or 3 years of a kid not succeeding.
Right.
Which builds up an incredible barrier, I'm preaching to the choir, for the rest of his or her educational career.
Right.
But here's the challenge. We do a good job of moving kids along. However, sometimes they come to us in 7th grade.
I know.
And they're at a
I
second
know.
grade level.
You're right.
So, in the past, and I'm talking not just here, kind of across the boards, we've done a really good job of creating those support systems at an elementary level. We don't have them as structured at the middle school and high school. So as we talk about MTSS, we're talking K-12, right? We're talking about those monitoring kids, having those conversations, providing additional interventions and supports. That's the benefit of having a dedicated win time in all of our buildings. So kids have the opportunity to have those supports that they need to be successful. Because if kids start with us and stay with us, they will do better.
True. I mean, that's true. I mean, we get a lot of kids plopped into us a couple years behind, in 4th grade, and that's the first time we've ever seen them. And that's a challenge, and that's going to continue to be a challenge, not just for our district, but all districts.
No, that's helpful. Maybe workshop. We always bring these back up at workshop time. Maybe that's a good time to revisit if there's a first
Maybe
or
that's a
second
good
grade
idea.
reading time but something to think about between now and then. Is there a way to measure or capture some of these thoughts?
Yep. Thanks for indulging, Clint.
You bet.
Any additional questions on this before we move into the all-exciting portion of the agenda?
I know. Well,
boy.
Amy just perked right up now.
She's ready to go. All right, so that moves us into the second reading of policies. We have 2 that we want to go ahead that were affirmed, so this is the second reading of these. First one's criminal civil action. Caroline?
Yep, and there are no changes from the October 8th review, first reading. And I believe for David's, I don't know if
So I did talk to David, and everything we talked about at the last meeting has been updated and changed. So, again, if there are other questions or things we need to take a look at, I'll make sure we do that.
Any questions or thoughts on that one, as well as the maltreatment of minors? No, these both will come back next time in the consent agenda? All right, with that, we'll move to the new ones. Transportation of non-public students. Dee Dee.
Okay, on 708, transportation of non-public students, no changes other than some grammar alignment and some capitalization that were made change, but nothing changed as far as the content.
Excellent.
Want me to keep rolling?
Keep rolling.
Okay.
Keep going, yep.
On 709, I made some additional changes. That one I'll go through a little bit further. Let me get to that one. Again, some small grammatical changes, capitalization. On the section that we talked about in section 3, B2J, which on mine is on page 3, I added the electronic cigarettes as requested. Then on section 3, B31I, page 4, changed from will, where it says drivers will assign seats, to drivers may assign seats. And then on 3B6B1, changed consequences to warning, and then also in the end document as well. Then the last one, I really apologize. I do need to make a correction. I just had communication between myself and my secretary so on page 5, section 3B4I, I feel like I'm reading bingo. What? Bingo. Where it's students will not harass others. I believe what I heard you say, students will not harass others physically or on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation or in other manner. Does that fit with what we had?
I think David said, because we have other policies that outline those categories in a certain way, if we could match those, that would be great for consistency.
I did look at the harassment one, and that's more adult. It's very long. You want all of that on there?
Well, I think as long as all of the groups are covered, I don't think it has to be verbatim, but the language was so awkward, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So.
Okay.
Yep, great, thank you.
Okay. That was all on 709. And then 711, the only change was under section 2, letter A, 2 and 3, about the video cameras. Instead of may be installed, it was will be installed, because that's our policy or practice. Okay. Do you want me to do my other ones, or do you want me to?
You know what? We can just have you stay up there
Okay.
and do the last 4. So
Okay.
Gifts to employees, transportation.
Actually 5. I have employee right to know 407, which there's just some small grammar changes made to that one. Same with 421, which is gifts to employees. Just a small change, added an S to recognize in the first paragraph. Then we move to 707, transportation of public students. The only major change other than some grammar was under section 10. There was a concern that it was kind of left up to the school board to make the decision about the control and management, if you remember that. Changed it to school district. I got you off the hook.
Yep. You are the best.
710, policy 710, transportation extracurricular, no changes. 805, waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. Again, some small grammar changes were made throughout the document. And thank you, Amy.
Yeah. I don't remember which transportation policies were the one that talked about like we would transport people if it didn't impact. Did that get deleted or changed in some way? I don't remember which one that was. We had a long talk about that at the work session where it seemed like we would just transport random people if it didn't disrupt anything. And I know John Thomas said that we obviously don't let people on the bus that aren't supposed to be on there. And I just can't remember which. I was paging through them quick and I just didn't see which one had that section.
I think it's 707. Section 4C.
Yeah, because we talked about how if we don't let people on the bus, we probably should not have that in the policy.
Okay, let me follow up on that one, and then as well, the student transportation safety. Okay?
Yeah, the other thing on 7-Eleven, just as far as a little cleanup, I don't know if we need A3 anymore, since we changed A2 to say a video camera will be installed in each and every school bus. Kind of takes out the need to have A3.
So one more time.
Under policy 7-Eleven,
Uh-huh.
under A3, I don't think we need A3 anymore, since we changed A2 so that a video camera will be installed, so it takes out the need to have A3. Because there'll already be a
Oh,
camera on every
okay,
bus.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
So just to clean up a little bit.
All right.
Any other things for Dee Dee and her policies? All right. Thanks, Dee Dee.
Yep, thank you.
Next we'll move to 511, student fundraising. Caroline?
And that was one that we were affirming, yet you found that one section, section 4, there was that one sentence in there that you wanted removed, and that was striking out, the superintendent shall report to the school board at least annually on the nature and scope of student fundraising activities approved pursuant to policy. So that was, now it's a reaffirm or a revised policy, and I struck that out, so that's the only change, and then some edits.
Excellent.
And then are you going to cover David's as well,
And
102?
I talked with David today, and everything that was talked about at the last meeting, was grammatical changes and small changes here or there. Everything was reflected in the conversation we had at the last meeting.
Board, any comments on 102, 413, or 522? All right. With that, we'll conclude that and move on to the communications and information. Communications from the school board. We'll start with you, Lisa.
Always start with me.
We just love to hear from you.
Well, I'm sure you do. I mean, who wouldn't? I guess just from an MSBA standpoint, I think I mentioned we're kind of starting delegate assembly and kind of looking at, what's happening, getting ready for the next legislative session. So that's happening, and Carver had their first site council meeting, and all is going well there, so that's all I have.
Ron and I are on the facilities task force, which met for the first time 2 weeks ago. And I just wanted to say that just based on, Dee just gave us some introductory information, but that group already had really good questions and conversation just based around the little bit of preliminary information that she gave us. So I think the task force is going to be off to a really good start tomorrow night when we really start to dig into things. So I'm very happy with how that's going so far.
That's great. Fred?
Chaska High School has the beginning of an issue that the parents were concerned about, and that's the e-cigarettes. Vaping. The kids are being very creative in terms of finding things to do with them to increase their potency and others. And they made it sound like a very serious thing, which it is. And then they said they think there's probably 25 or so kids that are involved. So it's not a big number yet, but it's out there, and it's coming. I think it's going to grow to be if we're not careful, it's going to be a real serious problem.
It's something that I worry about, because it's not like back in the day, if somebody was smoking in the boys' room, you could smell it, right? And you can do this anywhere, and you don't know what's in it. It can be nothing. It could be nicotine. It could be marijuana. I mean, there's a lot of other things that could be in that.
I'm very naive, but they also have ways to increase the power of it. Yes. I mean, it's on steroids, no pun intended.
In fact, a lot of the law enforcement, even now, are finally starting to catch up with some solutions they have to carry to like a little dropper to test it to see what's in it. All right.
And the other problem they said too is that the kids don't believe there's anything dangerous about it. It's I'm not smoking. It's okay.
No, they do think it's safer, right?
Yeah, they really do believe it is.
They do.
And it's
actually not.
No, it's a different kind of danger.
Yeah.
So something to keep our eyes on. Yeah, I knew we were already, but.
Topic. Josie?
Yes, I attended the Chaska Homecoming Parade. Always a great small town event, or the feeling of it at least. I also attended the Clover Ridge Site Council. Everything's moving along there. They did mention the Facilities Task Force. I think Slindy maybe is on it. Is that right? So it's good just to start at the, these site councils to start talking about it. And there was some good conversation, but just the awareness I think is really helpful. That we have some of those key people that are on the Facilities Task Force. And we have our first SEEK meeting tomorrow night. It's the Special Education Advisory Council meeting. So they're reducing their amount for the whole year. So I think there's just 3 or 4 of them throughout the whole year. So we have that tomorrow night. So,
Great, thanks. I have no report, which moves us on to communications from superintendent.
Just a couple of quick things. One, well, it's been about a week and a half ago, met with community leaders. So it's our mayors and county officials, and we did meet here for that meeting, but we've been meeting out in the buildings, and so we'll get back to being out in the buildings as we meet a few more times yet this year. But I presented to them my kind of what I've done with our parent advisory group and others. It's just an overview of what's happening in the district in terms of what our students are doing, what's happening with our facilities, the growth in the community, the deferred maintenance pieces, so you can kind of see where this conversation is leading. But presented that to community leaders, and I think it was interesting. I think they're probably more aware than the general community about growth. So they didn't talk much about that. It was like, yep, we get it. We talked a little more about deferred maintenance, and I think part of the reason that we do these, and I've done these early on, is there's just good feedback and good comments. Denny Laufenberger mentioned, well, as you talk about deferred maintenance, that's a big number, right? What's the total assessed value of all of our buildings right now today? So when you put that in context to the total evaluation, it makes more sense, right? It puts it in perspective,
question,
right?
isn't it?
So that's an area we can come back and then refine that and make sure we're communicating that information. So again, it was very well received, and some good conversation. And again, we'll get out in the buildings. I think the next time we'll be at the Chaska City Council chambers, and the city of Chaska will be talking about their downtown. Dee, what's that called? This City Square West plans and the development for some of the downtown Chaska. They'll be presenting some of that information to us. And then as we meet again in March, we'll have some information for that group again about our facilities and some of the preliminary conversations that we're having with the community. So good meeting. I also, just the last thing, I want to thank Brett and his team in Teaching and Learning and the Digits. They did hold the second webinar for Empower, the one during the day. We had over 120 people sign up for that one, and about 100 of those actually were there for it and stayed with it. We're seeing a lot of the same consistent questions, which is good, but again, participation was really strong. And so, we felt good about the time invested in that, and again, gives us opportunities to come back and continue to check in on those folks too and provide ongoing communication and support in a variety of ways. Right? So again, I think it was great work by many different groups in pulling that together.
Great, thanks, Clayton. With that, our final item is adjournment.